No, 1 minute, I was told. 2 minutes. All right, let's do 2 minutes.
2 minutes.
I beg your pardon, 2-minute closing statements. Timers, are you ready? I will now introduce the candidates for the 142nd Assembly District. Now, to my right is Miss Latham. Am I pronouncing your name right?
It's Lucy Dathan.
Dathan, I apologize.
Dathan. It's like Nathan, but begins
Yeah,
with
I
a D.
apologize.
That's all right.
It's Lucy Dathan, and sitting next to her is Mr. Wilms. Mr. Wilms has won the toss and will present his opening statement first. Go ahead, please. 1 minute.
Good evening, and thank you to the League of Women Voters for sponsoring this, and also to my opponent, Lucy. Regardless of how you feel about national politics, Connecticut issues have a separate dynamic. Our state is controlled by legislators from Bridgeport, New Haven, and Hartford, and those affiliated with the state employee unions. And their policies and interests are the complete opposite of New Canaan's. There's 4 main areas that I'd like to focus on tonight. First is the New Canaan taxpayers. Hartford recently just raised taxes by $1.7 billion, and any tax increases, unfortunately, hit New Canaan disproportionately hard. Secondly, the police. I'm a strong supporter of the New Canaan police and restoring qualified immunity. Thirdly, with regards to the schools, I believe we should have New Canaan control over the schools, and I oppose all regionalization attempts. And then finally, in the area of zoning and neighborhood protection, again, we need to have local control over that, and I do not support any bills to have the state have any override capability.
Thank you, Ms. Dathan. Your opening statement.
Thank you to the League of Women Voters for organizing this debate and advocating for more civic engagement, especially as we celebrate the centennial of the women's right to vote. Thank you to the co-sponsors and the moderator, and thank you to Fred for your participation and all the viewers at home. Local elections are so important as they truly affect our day-to-day lives. I am so proud to have represented you for the last 2 years, and in my 25-year finance experience as a CPA, investment banker, and most recently as a CFO of technology companies, helping them think long-term and strategically with their budgeting and business planning. Connecticut is at a crossroads. We have a number of fiscal challenges ahead of us due to the pandemic, and we need a comprehensive and stable vision for our future. I will continue to bring my expertise to the Appropriations Committee. During my first term as Vice Chair of the Insurance and Real Estate Committee, I have dedicated to improving Connecticut's residents to accessibility of health care.
I thank you, and we are going to questions now, and Ms. Dathan, you will be answering the question first. Even though public transportation usage has declined post-COVID, it will continue to be an important element of our town and state's economic health. Connecticut recently received a $400,000 federal grant to study transportation funding. What transportation options or improvements do you foresee, and what are the potential sources of funding for those improvements? Again, I'm happy to repeat the question. 2 minutes. 90 seconds.
Thank you. So I am very supportive of improving our transportation. Transportation is one of the key inhibitors for us growing businesses here in our state. It is an inhibitor for businesses and people wanting to come to our state. We need to ensure that we are smart in our transportation. We're looking at a multimodal form of transportation that's focusing not just on roads, but rails, also looking at our seaports as well as our air and aviation. Our current roads are average age of 55 years. We have bridges that are over 62% are over 48 years old. 5 Metro North bridges are over 100 years old. All of this is causing delays on all of our transport. It is very much time for us to reinvest and look at it. I'm supporting the toll program, which would pay a user fee for people who are using our our highways, and looking at some of the major highways, focusing on 95, 91, and not the Merritt Parkway though, but really focusing on the users who are using the roads. I think that the status quo is not an option, and we need to be looking ahead to making new adjustments. And in terms of our rails, I'm looking here. I've been a proud advocate for behalf of New Canaan for a passing lane on the branch line.
Thank you very much. Mr. Wilms, your response, please, in 90 seconds.
Yes. There's a special transportation fund that's been in existence for many years, and that's supposed to be used to fund our many transportation projects, whether it's roads or bridges or Metro North or the airports or any form of transportation. Unfortunately, it's been continually raided. I was privileged to serve as your state representative for 4 years, from 2015 to 19, and in my last term, I took the lead in getting the car sales tax transferred to the transportation fund, and the then DOT commissioner said, you know, if you do that, that's going to fully fund the transportation fund for the next 5 years, and that would cover whatever needs we had during that period of time. Unfortunately, what happened is the current administration and my opponent voted to divert those funds away and back to the general operating fund. So that's very, very unfortunate. You know, with regards to tolls, here's the question. Do you believe that that money will be used for transportation? Because I think if we did, that would be one separate conversation. But unfortunately, the track record year after year after year has been that that money gets diverted to the general operating fund for general budgetary purposes. And so if that's the case, it's just a new tax. It's just a new levy that's not going to what it was designed to be used for.
All right. Is there anything you'd like to add?
Yes, please.
Thank you. 30 seconds.
So this is a myth. This is false information. The STF has only been rated one time, and that's in 2003. And I have a chart here that was produced by the Nonpartisan Office of Fiscal Analysis indicating that. I have not voted to raid the fund. I did a survey in my district, and 80% of the respondents said that they are supporting that people who use the roads should be paying for them, and that means they're supporting tolls.
Thank you. Mr. Wilms, do you have anything to add?
Yes, the fact is that the current budget did take money that was scheduled to go to the transportation fund, and there were increases that were scheduled to go there, and they were diverted away. So that's simply a fact. Secondly, what the proponents of tolls don't mention is how many gantries there are going to be. Originally, there were over 100. Now it's been reduced, I think, to 50. So again, what it comes down to with tolls is, will the money be used for transportation? What guarantees exist that that will be the case? Thank you.
Okay, let's switch gears. This question goes to you, Mr. Wilms. Last spring, a school regionalization bill was proposed, and now a bill has been raised regarding affordable housing. What do you think should be the state's role regarding school regionalization and planning and zoning of affordable housing in local municipality? So school regionalization and planning and zoning for affordable housing.
Well, I really appreciate that question because that touches upon 2 points that I raised in my opening statement. I really believe that New Canaan and every town should have control over their own school system. And it's not clear to me what the purpose of regionalizing and taking away New Canaan control. I think New Canaan has the best ability to manage its own school system, and quite frankly, New Canaan has done an outstanding job managing its own school system. So I'm trying to understand what the purpose of regionalizing schools is exactly. Secondly, with regards to the zoning, when I served in the legislature, then Governor Malloy proposed these transit-oriented districts where essentially the state would have override capacity for any land within 5 miles of a Metro North train station. So if you take the New Canaan train station and you go 5 miles in any direction, that's a lot of New Canaan. Certainly also the same applies to Norwalk, where I'm from. And thankfully we defeated that bill. The new bills that I'm seeing are the Malloy bill on steroids, where essentially they're trying to cram affordable housing into areas where it doesn't belong. It becomes spot zoning. There is an affordable housing statute, 830G, and that has been serving a very good purpose. In Norwalk, we've always been over 10%, which is the required threshold, and I know New Canaan has been working to put in new affordable housing, And my approach has always been for communities like New Canaan that are moving in the right direction, they should be rewarded.
Thank you very much, Ms. Dathan. Dathan?
Thank you. I fully agree with my opponent here. I stood strong against my party, stood strong against my leaders in my party to stand up against regionalization. I did analysis to show that it didn't make financial sense. I also agree with his stance on zoning. I believe that New Canaan should have the control over regulations. So again, if a bill would to come up, I would stand strong against my party and my leadership again. New Canaan, we are very lucky. We have a lot of different developments. We have the mill apartments. I've been involved with the project and the discussing of the expansion of Canaan Parish. I have worked with the housing commissioner, and I look forward to supporting that project as it comes to fruition. All of these are under the 830G, as my opponent spoke about, and I fully agree that those policies are the right policies. I did want to go back to tolls, and I wanted to re-discuss that, you know, we shouldn't be funding for people from New York to get to the Cape. We should be ensuring that we pay for our roads in a responsible manner. And the more gantries you have, the less price point that each gantry would be. So whilst, you know, we're talking about several gantries, the cost per mile would still be about 4 cents to Connecticut residents.
Thank you. Anything to add on the regionalization or zoning?
Yes, I would. Lucy voted with her party, the Hartford Democrats, 97% of the time in 2019. And so apparently you voted against them on 3% of the occasion. And I'm glad to hear that both of the regionalization proposals would fall into that 3% category. Finally, again, with tolls, the question is, what guarantee is there that the money that's raised by tolls will be used to pay for transportation projects? That's the question I'm asking.
Okay. Yes, on the regionalization and...
Yes. Again, I stood up against my party. I did an analysis to prove that it didn't make sense. And yes, 90% of all of the work we do in Hartford is done on a bipartisan basis. And 95% of the bills are done with, you know, some support of both parties. So in a sense, I voted more times against my own party than with my own party when it came to the differentials.
Thank you very much. We're ready for another question, and it will go to you first, Ms. Dathan. The Affordable Care Act is in litigation right now before Supreme Court. What are your legislative priorities for health care coverage in Connecticut, depending on the outcome?
Well, we could have a huge debate over this because this is probably one of the things I'm most passionate about. With the Affordable Care Act under siege by the federal government, it is more concerning now, especially during a pandemic, that we ensure that everyone has access to affordable health care. I am vice chair of the Insurance and Real Estate Committee. Very lucky to be a vice chairman so early in my tenure, but I have been supporting measures to ensure that we can have affordable health care. I have been champion on ensuring that our pre-existing conditions remained in statute. I codified them into law. I also sponsored bills around and championed bills around telemedicine to ensure that telemedicine could continue during the pandemic. I also looked at capping the cost of insulin, but more importantly, one of the things I feel that most proudly about is my working on the public option health care. I believe that we need to have an alternative to regular health insurance because not everybody can get private health care through their work. So it gives people another option to be able to use the state's insurance and be able to buy into it at no cost to taxpayers, that they would be able to get a affordable health care plan that would be about 20% less than ACA plans.
Thank you very much, Mr. Wilms.
Yeah, healthcare is a very important issue, especially with the pandemic, and I agree with Lucy on that. Well, first of all, with regards to the Affordable Care Act, many of those provisions have been voted into state statute already. and actually I voted for many of them when I served in the legislature. I also supported the Medicare Savings Program, which helps seniors pay for their Medicare deductibles and premiums. We have the Medicaid expansion that we implemented here in Connecticut under the ACA. Also, I co-sponsored a bill to expand telehealth. I think that is a very important issue. I agree with Lucy about the insulin capping. The other thing that I found interesting is that one of the first things that Governor Lamont, one of the provisions he suspended was the certificate of need for new hospitals and healthcare facilities. And I think we should make that permanent. We're one of the few states that actually requires that, and I think it inhibits the supply of medicine and healthcare. And I'd like to see that made. Like to see that made permanent. Anything that we can do to create more options, more supply for our citizens is only to the best when it comes to healthcare.
Thank you. Is there anything to add?
Yes, I'd like to add something. So my opponent says he supports healthcare, but he voted in 2018 session on LCO 4279, which would take away pre-existing conditions and also would make healthcare more affordable, more expensive for families that are getting healthcare. We also need to ensure that we expand it, especially during a pandemic.
Okay, more to say?
I've always supported pre-existing conditions. My father was a disabled veteran, and I remember as a boy growing up that he couldn't get insurance because he was a disabled veteran, and it was something that affected our family right from the very beginning. I've always supported pre-existing conditions.
All right, switching gears, this question goes to you first, Mr. Wilms. A significant portion of Connecticut's budget goes to debt service and salaries, pension obligations, and benefits for public union employees. What could the legislature do to control these costs and put Connecticut's cost structure more in line with neighboring states?
Well, that's really the key question when it comes to our state finances. Employee compensation is over 40% of the entire state budget. And when I chaired the Board of Finance in Norwalk, we renegotiated all the union contracts. You have to renegotiate the contracts. And next year, the wage contracts are coming up for the various state employee unions. What you need to do is you need to put new employees on essentially 401ks, defined contribution plans. You need to get rid of the post-retirement health care for new employees and also make health care reform. And also it's been shown that the state employees get compensation that's about 20 or 25% greater than what they would earn in the private sector. So really what it comes down to is having political will to renegotiate and make structural changes to the union contracts and to the state finances. And that's something that I did on the city level for 8 years. And in 2017, I was a key member because of my strong finance background, both in government finance and also in banking. I was one of the leading members on the Appropriations Committee and for the Republican caucus. We passed in Connecticut for the first time in over 30 years the Republican budget that had no tax increases and built up the rainy day fund and inputted the constitutional spending cap. These kind of structural changes can happen, and I show that I have the skill set to make that the case.
Thank you. Ms. Latham?
I hear and echo your concerns that this debt has caused, but Fred, I have to question your level of commitment. The day after you lost the election in 2018, you chose to resign your seat on the Pension Sustainability Commission. This appointed seat, which was not tied to your role as an elected representative. Connecticut does not need quitters. And in the 142nd District needs a representative that shows commitment to solve the problems that really matter to our state. As Fred stated, 50% of our state budget is going to fixed costs. That has grown, that's doubled in nearly 12 years. More and more of that is going every year, that is growing. While in the same 12-year period, our variable expenses, or the things that aren't dependent on any debt servicing and other obligations, have decreased. So it is very important that we look at everything. I am looking forward to the next session where we are going to be digging into the mitigation plan. Connecticut is facing a $2 billion deficit in the fiscal year 21, and it is absolutely essential that we have people who can think long-term and strategically to get us out of this mess, and people that don't quit.
Thank you, sir. Anything to add?
You know, that's a backhanded compliment. I was the only Republican selected to be on that Pension Sustainability Commission. And after the election, where all of the Republicans here lost, and we lost our voting capability in Hartford, it turns out that that commission produced absolutely none of the recommendations that we were working on, because the political dynamic had changed. The Democrats took control in Hartford, and they had no interest in making any of those kind of reforms. You know, quite frankly, Lucy, you know, you've been endorsed by the Working Families Party, which to me is a huge red flag, because they are the creatures of the state employee unions. And
I think that was time.
Is that time?
Oh, okay. I saw 60.
Okay, Lucy. I'm sorry, Ms. Latham.
Okay.
Would you have anything to add?
Yes. Well, so the commission was just at the crux of coming up with final solutions when Fred decided to quit. And my feeling is we need people who are going to be dedicated to solving the state's problems, dedicated to having their voices heard, and dedicated to being sure that they are representative of their district. My feeling is we can't have people that aren't fully committed to this role.
All right, thank you very much. We'll try another topic. Ms. Latham, you're first. Discussions about racial justice and poverty are taking place across the country, state, and also in New Canaan. How do you view racial justice and poverty levels in Fairfield County? And what policy areas do you feel will need legislative action, if any?
It's a great question. I see a couple different areas where we need to have more justice for people. We did speak a little bit about healthcare as the first area where I believe that people need to be able to buy their health insurance at a reasonable price that isn't going to put them into debt. We need to ensure that housing is fair, and people also don't go up with a lot of expenses for their housing, so they need to be green and sustainable with not a lot of extra expenses. And the last area where I think we need to look about justice and equity there is in environmental justice. Too many parts of our state have areas that are brownfields and other places that definitely need to have some investment and love put into them so that they can grow and be good. But we also need to make sure that people have their say and there is adequate hearings over this. We need to ensure that people have access to fresh water, to fresh air, and all of the other things to keep them healthy. But most of all, I feel healthcare is the most important thing.
Thank you, Mr. Wilms.
Yeah, could you repeat the question, please?
Absolutely. It's a long one. Hold on, I had turned the page already. All right. Discussions about racial justice and poverty are taking place across the country, state, and in New Canaan. How do you view racial justice and poverty levels in Fairfield County, and what policy areas do you feel will need legislative action, if any?
Well, that's an important question. It's something that we, as a country, have been struggling with for much of this year. Clearly, we have a lot more work that we need to do, and in our entire history, we've always had to, and I think we need to redouble our efforts to make sure that there's equal opportunities for all. My approach is that for those who don't have the opportunities that others have, we need to look to expand those circles. One area that I've been a huge supporter of are charter schools. Charter schools are public schools that are state funded and state chartered, and they provide opportunities to kids who maybe wouldn't be getting it otherwise. There's some wonderful charter schools. For example, there's the Amistad Academy in New Haven, and it's 98% African American and Hispanic, and there's huge waiting lists to get into that school. There's a charter school in Norwalk, for example, in South Norwalk. There's also inter-district regional schools and magnet schools. So I'm a big supporter of reducing the caps that the state has imposed on the number of charter schools in the state. Also, the funding restrictions that the state has imposed, mostly because of pressure from the teachers' unions. And then finally, I work with small businesses in my banking job, and I'm a big believer that we need to do further outreach for minority-owned businesses so that more wealth and more opportunities are created.
Thank you. Is there more to be said, Ms. Dathan?
I'll just add on that I actually oppose the charter schools. It sounds like a Betsy DeVos plan that we're trying to put into Connecticut. My feeling is it takes away funding from our regular schools. We need to ensure that our schools are well funded, whether they're magnet or they are other normal schools. So I will continue to fund the ECS formula and make sure that we get there, and make sure that we are also funding ELL programs in our area.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Wilms. Anything else to add to this?
No, I just think that, charter schools, they were around long before Betsy DeVos became, a secretary. They've been around for decades. The charter school in Norwalk has been there for over 20 years. And I've met many of the kids. I know many of the kids. I went to the Amistad Academy. There's a charter school in Bridgeport. And you know what? The parents are excited. There's waiting lists and queues to get into the school. And they desperately want their kids to get those opportunities. And I for one, believe that we really need to reach out there.
Thank you very much. Now, the next question goes to you again, Mr. Wilms. New Canaan has experienced water shortages, prolonged power outages, and limited access to natural gas. While new legislation just passed to enhance consumer protection for utility customers, what additional long-term solutions would you advance to improve our energy and resource infrastructure?
Well, that's an important question. I agree with what many of the reforms that were passed. What Eversource, the way they didn't step up, the way they didn't respond during the last storm was just completely unacceptable. And as far as I'm concerned, I think the CEO should have resigned because of just the extremely poor performance. I like the new metric system in terms of how they're regulated and evaluated, and I think there needs to be more of a focus on how Eversource handles ratepayers or our customers as opposed to ratepayers and shareholders. I'm also a big believer in diversifying our energy sources. First, I'm excited about the wind turbine project at Long Island Sound. I think that can provide some low-cost energy, and also it's renewable. I've also been a huge supporter of solar. I've also been a big proponent of electric cars. A few years ago, I tried to get Tesla to be allowed to be sold in Connecticut. It was illegal to buy a electric car in Connecticut. I thought that's just ridiculous. And so I'm going to continue to support alternative energies, alternative approaches. And as far as Eversource and United Illuminating, they need to be held accountable and responsive to us as consumers.
Thank you very much, Ms. Lavin.
I was a very proud supporter of our bill that we did in the September special session to hold Eversource accountable. It was one of my toughest constituent helping situations. For several weeks, I've been helping New Canaan residents with trying to get their power restored. I had very fragile medically fragile people. I had pregnant women, newborn babies, elderly people. One of my constituents actually fell because of the lack of power. It was unacceptable that they had such a bad experience, and it was so bad that Eversource did not do their jobs. I was proud to have regular conversations, but it doesn't stop at Eversource. We also have issues with our local cable companies. I know so many New Canaan residents are really suffering at the hands of not having good internet access. And we've seen it, especially during this COVID experience, where many of us are working from home. Many of us have children who are doing remote schoolwork. We need reliable service. It's very important. Lastly, I am supportive of alternative energy sources, looking at solar, wind, and other sources. And my view is we need to take away the monopoly of Eversource in our state, and we need to ensure folks have extra choices.
Thank you very much. Mr. Wilms, anything to add?
No, I don't.
Okay. Ms. Latham? No. All right, final question coming up, and it will go to you, Ms. Latham. Sorry, I will get it. I'm having a hard time with this.
Don't worry.
There are many factors that make a state attractive to businesses: abundant talent pool, taxes, transportation, regulation. What ideas do you have to attract businesses that will put down roots and stay in Connecticut past COVID?
That is a great question, and I am very kind of hit it from the transportation point of view, because we saw in our last report by Moody's, a famous credit rating agency, that we actually were given a very favorable rating, and it was due to the amount of money we've saved in our $3 billion rainy day fund that will help us get through this COVID crisis. But we need to figure out, one of the problems that Moody's said is without the ability to get people around in our state will not be able to grow. Businesses will not want to move to Connecticut if they can't get their employees around. Small businesses that are reliant on servicing customers can't afford time wasted on 95 and the Merritt Parkway trying to service their customers. People need to get around, and we need to have good transportation for that. We also need to ensure that we are training our workers of tomorrow in advanced manufacturing jobs, and I've been very supportive of efforts like this. I've been very supportive of the Angel Investor Tax Credit, which is going to help businesses start up here in our state. With my corporate finance background, that is a key component for wanting to get businesses up and going. So thank you.
Mr. Wilms?
Yeah, well, the first thing we need to do is get our state finances in order. Companies don't want to move to a state that has a $1 to $2 billion structural deficit every single year. Worried about, well, what new taxes are going to be raised or implemented. So that's the first thing we need to do, is get that in place. And in 2017, I was part of the group that was able to produce the Republican budget, which became the bipartisan budget that did not raise taxes, built up the rainy day fund that Lucy referred to, that's now going to go up to $3 billion. Secondly, we need to have our tax structure attractive for businesses. Essentially, what we need to do is just look good relative to our neighbors, in particular New York and Massachusetts. And so we need to ensure that our tax structure is competitive relative to our two neighbors. We also need to work on regulations. Our small businesses are burdened with so many regulations. And also, they're just really not treated as friends. Small business owners tell me all the time that when it comes to unemployment compensation issues or workers' compensation issues, they're always getting the short stick. And it really, for some businesses, the final straw for them to leave our state. Back in the late 80s, businesses came here because they wanted to. We didn't have to bribe them. We didn't have to give them packages. They just came here. And so we know what we need to do is restore what we had just 30 years ago.
Thank you very much. Anything else to add?
Yes, please. So the GOP budget, it claims that there's no increase on tax, but actually there was $1.5 billion of new revenue in taxes. It increased property taxes on cars by an elimination of the motor vehicle tax, or motor vehicle mill rate cap. It also increased business taxes, eliminated the angel investor tax credit, which will incentivize new businesses, and it eliminates the tax deduction for utilities. Plus, that was a hard hit on education.
Okay, Mr. Wilms, final word?
The budget that Lucy voted for just last year raised taxes by $1.7 billion. And, what really disappointed me was there was really no attempt made by the governor or by the Democrats in Hartford to try to achieve cost savings or any kind of structural changes. They just went right for the tax increase. And unfortunately, that's now the third one that we've had in 10 years. And we've had 3 major tax increases, and what do we have? We still have $1 to $2 billion structural deficits.
Thank you very much. This finishes the questions. We are now going to go to closing statements. And Mr. Wilms, you go first. 2 minutes.
Yes, once again, thank you to the League of Women Voters, and thank you, Lucy. 2020, this has been one heck of a year. We live in turbulent times, and I think now more than ever, we need legislators who maybe take a more thoughtful, maybe a more calm, maybe approach that looks to bring people together. We've had enough of the bickering, we've had enough of the divisiveness and the partisanship, and I think people just want people who can reach out to others and fix problems and solve things. There's 2 examples in my public service history that I'll just point to. For 8 years, I chaired the Board of Investment Taxation for the City of Norwalk, which is the finance board. 4 Republicans, 3 Democrats. Most of that time was during the Great Recession, when things were very volatile. We produced 8 city budgets, all approved unanimously. Secondly, when I was in the legislature, I teamed up with State Representative Bruce Morris, a legislator from South Norwalk. And together, he and I, we co-sponsored a bipartisan bill that for the first time in decades changed the ECS formula to bring more money to the schools. And I did that by reaching across the aisle. He and I, we testified together, we worked together, and that's the kind of approach that I think we need and that I'll continue to bring if you bring me back to Hartford.
Thank you very much. Your turn, ma'am.
Maya Angelou told us wisely, when somebody shows you who they are, believe them the first time. We need to remember that in here. I commend anyone who steps forward for public service, but Mr. Wilms has already shown us that he is not an effective legislator. He hasn't represented his constituents. He has repeatedly told us what he's against and what he's for. He has not brought us more funding to the schools, and he walked away from his appointment to solve the pension and financial challenges of our state. I have been working for you, my constituents in the 142nd District, through COVID, through issues with Eversource, through issues with cable and other problems that you've had. I have also helped face issues faced you in the last 2 years. I have built a sustainable strategic budget without raising the income tax, without raising taxes on capital gains. I have fought for lowering the cost of health care. I have worked to keep you informed and helping our community during this pandemic, and I'm ensuring that our schools are well funded. And these are all priorities I hope to return to in 2021 and fight for maintaining local control over our schools and zoning and modernizing our transportation. I ask respectively tonight for your vote on November 3rd or at your home on your absentee ballot.
Thank you very much, candidates. Appreciate. It was wonderful being here with you, and please don't forget to vote.
Great.
This concludes this segment, and we will be going to the senatorial debate. Thank you.